Conference Committee report on House File number 888, and this is the Fabian motion. Conference Committee report on House File 888, and the report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File 888, report that we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommended as follows. The Conference Committee is signed by 4 of the 5 conferees on behalf of the House and 4 of the 5 conferees on the part of the Senate. Fabian moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File number 888 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
I recognize the member from Roseau, Representative Fabian, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that is my motion. Thank you, members. The House File 888, when it left here and through the Conference Committee process, has had a few changes. I'll kind of give a brief overview on that. We had in the House position, we had a further reduction of $10 million to meet up with the Senate. So there we shifted some money from the Environmental Fund to the General Fund. The DNR appropriation is $204 million plus out of the General Fund. That's a roughly $5.6 million increase. Bowser has got about $27 million in the General Fund, which is a reduction actually, but then we've taken $22 million from them, from their base, and transferred that to the Clean Water Fund for some of the buffer efforts with our local SWCDs. The Minnesota Zoo got a $400,000 increase. We did make some changes in the Environmental Fund changes. The wastewater biofuels infrastructure project, there's a $300,000 appropriation there. The St. Louis River watershed remediation, $432,000. There's $3.9 million for the county feedlot program, $1.6 million for the EQB program operations. There's what else? $820,000 for the U of M for the AIS Center out of the Game and Fish Fund. $480,000 SWC grants through Bowser. Minnesota Zoo got a $400,000 increase in their operational support, which was actually a decrease from what we had. Senate provisions that we added, state park activity, or some permits for some disabled American veterans for entering into some state parks, an exemption for some non-resident watercrafts, little canoes and kayaks and so forth. The Blaze Pink provision is in there. That was a Senate provision. The Golden Shiner minnow situation is in there. The Crow Wing County landfill is added to the closed landfill program. Plastic bag preemption, and then there's a $20,000 grant that's given out to 4 different communities, I believe it is. Some Senate provisions that were, we dropped the no net gain provisions, and Senate provisions that were dropped were permission to place traps on private property, the written permission, the feedlot threshold raised to 200,000 animal, or 2,000 animal units, excuse me, and then the suspension of the water quality standards. We do have $2.3 million in funding the second year for some buffer aid. We also have some language in there that allows the local SWCDs to approve additional alternative practices. We've also made sure that the seeds that are going to be used in this program be certified as being Palmer amaranth and noxious weed free. And we've extended the deadlines on public waters to 2019 and the public drainage systems to 2020. And then also the House and Senate did adopt or drop the navigational lights provision that DNR wanted. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Members, I just want to pause here in the discussion on the Conference Committee report to recognize a former member who is joining us in the chamber. He served from 1993 to 2003, representing Stearns, Morrison, and Benton counties. Please join me in welcoming former Representative Steve Daler. Discussion on the Conference Committee report. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Is a motion to refuse to adopt a higher motion than the adoption motion?
That is correct. It is a higher motion.
Mr. Speaker, I would move not to adopt the Conference Committee report, and I would request a roll call.
Representative Hortman moves to refuse to adopt the Conference Committee report and requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is sort of our moment of truth here in the Minnesota House, where we can decide whether we are going to proceed on a path of collaboration or confrontation. We can not choose the path of confrontation. We can send this conference committee back to the parking spot of the conference committee, and we can continue to have conversations between the executive branch and the legislative branch. No doubt everyone is aware that we have Republicans in control of the House and the Senate, and we have a Democratic governor. Yet we have a $1.65 billion surplus, and we have made good headway in negotiations over the last week. We have 13 days left in session. If we choose conflict right now over collaboration and continued careful work on the budget, we almost certainly send this legislative session into overtime, a special session, and then who knows, on the brink of another state government shutdown. And members, it does not have to be this way. We had a very productive conversation just today about how important it is for us to work together. I think the Speaker himself said that we needed to work together several times. It would be nice if he meant it. We have an opportunity here as members of the House to exercise some control about what happens next. Whether you're a rank and file member of the minority or the majority, you are not beholden to what your leaders decide to do in terms of being reasonable or unreasonable in engaging in negotiations. You have an opportunity to register your own opinion, or whether you choose collaboration or conflict. So members, a vote to refuse to adopt the conference committee report is a vote to go back to the negotiating table and to continue to work together. Yes, it's tiresome. Yes, it's detailed work. I know some people don't like tiresome and detailed work, but that is how we will reach agreement between two different parties on a $46 billion budget. I can tell you one thing for sure. We will not find an agreement if we stop talking to each other. And sending the conference committee reports to the governor really blows up negotiations and sets everything back by as much as a week. I would implore members to please vote to refuse to adopt the conference committee report.
Discussion on the Hortman motion to refuse to adopt. The member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would speak against the motion to refuse to adopt, and I want to give a little history of where we're at in negotiations to provide a little context. If you'll recall, we had all of our bills passed on the House floor and the Senate floor on April 7th, well over a month ago, about 5 weeks ago. We did this because we were very hopeful that we were going to be able to negotiate targets with the governor early on. We passed our bills. We had Easter break. We came back. The governor sent us a letter saying that he wanted to have three-way targets by April 28th. He wanted to have targets between the House, the Senate, and the governor's office by April 28th. When that date started to approach, it became very apparent that that wasn't going to happen, and then the governor said, no, we want to have you take a position between the House and the Senate before I agree to meet with you, which is different because 2 years ago, that wasn't the case at all. He wasn't interested in having a joint House and Senate position. He wanted to have three-way targets, three-way negotiations then, but this year he changed it. That's fine. We agreed, and we got our targets together. We honored, he picked the date. We were at the table, we picked it. We picked the 28th. He picked the 28th, we agreed to it. We got our targets out. And then our conference committees worked all weekend long last weekend, not the weekend before this. They worked all weekend long. Some of the staff people were here all night, working, trying to get the bills devised. Our members were here working hard, and we had all of our conference committees posted. I think by Monday, this bill Monday, I think all of them by Monday or maybe some Tuesday. And they've been sitting there ready to take up at any time. All they had to be is signed. And we did that because the governor said, no, it's not just good enough to have targets. We need to know your position. We need to know where you want to, what you want to do with the money, what you want funded, what you don't want funded. So we did that. We agreed to do that. We've been negotiating in good faith. We put together our bills. We did it in a timely manner. We had them adopted last week. They've been sitting there ready to negotiate. We've been trying to meet with the governor, and I agree we have been making some progress. We were here this weekend talking on Saturday. Unfortunately, the governor's schedule is he's not available that much. We met on Saturday. He said that he wasn't available to meet most days this week. He can't do it this weekend because of the fishing opener. Members, we have just 13 days left until the end of session, 13 days. And we are going to continue to make discussions with the governor. We want to make sure that we get our work done. But the people sent us here to get our job done. And our job as a legislature is to pass the bills. And then the governor's job is to decide whether or not he agrees with those bills. And he certainly has the prerogative to do with those bills as he wants. But we need to pass our bills and get our work done. We need to show the people of Minnesota that we in the legislature are getting our work done. And that's what we're going to do today. People have had over a week to look at these bills, and now is the time to move forward so that we can put a complete budget on the governor's desk, and then he can have time to review it and see what he wants to do with it. There's nothing that prevents us from continuing discussions with the governor if it works for his schedule or when it works for his schedule. I don't think it moves anything back. He wanted to know, even today, he was specifically asking, well, which areas do you want? He wanted a very, very specifics on our budget global targets. He came back, we gave him an offer for a full global target. We moved considerably. We met with him, we were still hopeful we would get a return offer for global targets, and then we found out that we were not going to get a return offer for global targets. And so it has come to the time where we need to get our work done. We'll continue to talk and negotiate, but right now, it is our job to put a budget on the governor's desk because that's what the people of Minnesota sent us here to do. So with that, I ask very sincerely that you refuse to this motion, deny the refusal to adopt, and that we take up this bill. Sorry, a little tongue-tied. That we take up this environment bill and we move forward.
Recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Davney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Majority Leader yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Davney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Majority Leader, you just shared with the body and through the miracle of television, the people of Minnesota, that the conference committees met all of the weekend before last. I believe that would have been April 29th and 30th were the Saturday and Sunday. I just looked through my emails and I didn't receive any notices of public meetings of the conference committees. And the expectation in this body is that committees meet in public, review bills in public, share negotiations in public. That's the expectation of the people of Minnesota. Can you point to me where I missed the public notices of conference committee meetings on April 29th and 30th?
Recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Dabney. Well, I think you know that they had to meet in order to adopt the delete everything amendments that were adopted over a week ago. They did that. All of our committees followed the process. They posted them. They've been posted, available for public comment. We've been getting feedback. And after a week, the conferees have now signed the conference committee reports, and they're ready to go.
Recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Dabney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, the Majority Leader failed to answer the question. And Minnesota, this bill and all the conference committee reports were negotiated over a weekend in a locked and closed office building where you weren't invited, where the sportsmen and women of the state weren't allowed to see who proposed what, where people who care about clean water, whether it's for recreation, drinking, bathing, or eating, weren't invited to observe the process, to weigh in on the process, to talk to their legislators. and it's the same for each and every one of the omnibus bills that the House GOP majority is offering. Negotiated behind closed doors over a weekend when Minnesota wasn't invited. For that reason alone, Mr. Speaker and members, we should vote yes on the Hortman amendment, or the Hortman motion to refuse to adopt and bring these bills and their process into the light of day for Minnesota to see. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Davney yield to a question, please?
He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Representative Davney, I'd like you to repeat what you said. You said that all of these bills were done with no public comment, and they were all done over this weekend. Are you willing to stand by that statement?
The member from Hennepin, Representative Davney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, that is my understanding. You can certainly correct me if you held public meetings on the 29th and 30th of April. I apologize. But I don't have anything in my email from any committee administrator indicating there were any public meetings that weekend when the Speaker had directed committee chairs to button up these bills. So, Representative Fabian, we have items in omnibus bills that were never introduced as individual bills, were not in House files, were not in Senate files, but have shown up now in omnibus committee reports that Minnesotans didn't get to see, that Minnesotans didn't get to weigh in on, and that are a violation of House rules.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Davney, you've got it wrong, okay? The environment bill was not done that way. We moved all of our stuff in public on Friday. And for you to stand on the House floor and tell Minnesotans that we've done this stuff on the weekend and in the dark and all that kind of stuff is a gross misrepresentation of what happened in the Environment Committee. And I take offense to that.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Pepin, I'm not going to belabor the argument here today with a refutation point by point of all the things you said about the negotiations of the governor that aren't true. The facts are the governor put out his budget. You put out your budget. Since that point, the governor has made 2 moves. The ball is in your court. And right now, what you're saying is we're not coming forward. And we're not going to continue to move. We're going to shove these bills down your throat. In other words, we're going back to our initial position. And, you know, the record is really clear that the governor made an offer where he moved $74 million off of his initial targets on 4 budget bills. He moved another $50 million today. We're making progress. It really seems like the absolute wrong time to pull out of negotiations when things are proceeding. But that's a choice that you're free to make.
The member from Sherburne, Representative Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Hortman, you're right about the 2 numbers. The governor did move $74 million in his first offer. We moved $355 million in the offer that we gave the governor, and the response to the governor was a move, as you said, of $50 million. So, and I should also mention that we provided global targets where we had movement on all the different bills. Governor initially proposed moving on only 4 bills, and when he came back with his offer just in the last couple hours, he again included those 4 bills, but on one of them he didn't move at all, and on the other one, he only moved about $1 million. So after a proposal of a $355 million move on our side, we were met with a $50 million move from the governor on only a few bills, and I guess we feel that we really need to be looking at the entirety of the budget, and the governor isn't doing that, and that's why we're proceeding forward.
Representative Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, it doesn't really do us all a lot of good to go back and forth on the floor here, but I think it's worth pointing out that the governor's moves were on 4 bills and yours were on 10. So comparing the size of the movement isn't really apples to apples. The governor was very clear that you should come back with the same level of detail that he provided you, and that really details matter. The budgets we pass affect the lives of the people of Minnesota. And so if you're willing to put an offer on the table, you should be willing to stand behind that offer and say what it is that you would cut that the state government is currently doing in the lives of Minnesotans. So members, Republicans, you seem to be intent on choosing a path of confrontation. I would just caution all the members of the body to think right now, at this moment, do you want to be fighting or do you want to be collaborating, working together, trying to get things done? A vote to refuse to adopt is a vote to work on collaboration and continued progress in negotiations.
Any further discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the motion. The clerk will close the roll. There being 57 ayes and 77 nays, the motion to refuse to adopt does not prevail. Members, we're now on the motion to adopt the conference committee report. Discussion on the motion to adopt the conference committee report. The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We had an opportunity here to send this back, and you have one more opportunity to send it back. You could vote no on adoption. Send it back and get the work done. 144-page bill with 34 pages of appropriations. You could send it back and get the work done. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry. If a conference committee report was laid on the table in the committee, does it take a motion to take it from the table, to send it, to adopt it, to send it to the floor? Like it was laid on the table.
Representative Hansen, I can't comment on what happened in the conference committee. All I can do is take up a conference committee report that has been properly filed here at the desk with the appropriate signatures of the conferees on that conference committee report. And we did check the conference committee report. It has 4 signatures from the House and 4 from the Senate, which is enough to make it a valid conference committee report and eligible for us here to take action on the House floor. Further discussion on the motion to adopt the conference committee report. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, on May 1st, in the conference committee, there was a motion to lay it on the table, and it was moved and voted on to lay this on the table. So would Representative Fabian yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Fabian, was there a meeting last night where this conference committee report was adopted?
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Representative Hansen, no.
Mr. Speaker.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Would Representative Fabian continue to yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Fabian, so if there was no meeting to move to take it off the table and there was no meeting to adopt the report, how come this report is in front of us?
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you repeat the question, please?
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Fabian. So if there was no meeting last night in the dark of night, in the dark of night. There was no meeting. There was no meeting with no motion to take it off the table, and there was no meeting to adopt the report. How is it that this conference committee report can be in front of us?
The member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I don't remember the exact motion that I made, but I remember clearly asking nonpartisan staff from the House and the Senate. I said, so what do I need to do as the chair of this committee to get this bill so that we can sign it? And they gave an explanation, and I said, so move. And then that was the Senate staff or House staff, I don't remember which one. And then I asked the other staff member from the other chamber the exact same question. What motion do I need to make to get this bill to the point to where it can be ready to be signed? And that was the explanation that they gave me, and I said, and I so move.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have the transcript here from the meeting. This was on television. And I know we're not supposed to read, but Mr. Knopp, motion to adopt the amendment as amended for staff to prepare the A17046 amendment as amended by the conference committee. Lay it on the table. We want an official engrossment and will not be a conference committee report move. So moved. All those in favor of the motion before us vote yes. This was on May 1st. But my question wasn't about what happened on May 1st. My question is what happened last night in the dark of night to bring this bill for us. Yes, I ask him to yield.
He will yield. Representative Fabian.
Mr. Speaker, it's my understanding that a conference committee report can be signed at any time.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Minnesotans, in the middle of the night, last night, something happened to send it here. No vote, no motion to take it off the table. And I think we have, two conference committee members didn't vote on it, but it's here in front of us. Now, earlier we had a lot of discussion about process, but this is kind of a stunning process. That here in front of us, the first of the bills approved in the middle of the night, or I guess not even approved, shouldn't say approved. The first of the bills where something happened in the middle of the night that are here. I think it's important that we move to this, to send this back, not just on process, but for the content of the bill. The content of 144 pages, that something magical happened last night to bring it in front of us here this morning. I would urge a no vote on adoption.
Further discussion on adoption of the conference committee report. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Point of order.
State your point of order.
Point of order under Section 341 of Masons.
And I assume you have advice?
I do, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
This bill is actually not properly before us because it was laid on the table as Representative Hansen laid out, and Section 341 of Masons clearly indicates that if something is laid on the table before any other action can be taken, it has to be taken off the table, and that motion has, based on the discussion that just went forward, clearly has not happened. And so I think the conference committee actually needs to go back, hold a hearing, vote to take it off the table, and vote to close the conference committee report, and actually vote on the report. I think we could rise under another point of order because they actually didn't vote on the actual conference committee report, but they clearly have to take a motion to take it off the table. And so I would argue, Mr. Speaker, that this bill is not this conference committee report is not properly before us, and I would hope that you would rule accordingly.
Members, to be very clear, the back page of the Conference Committee report reads, "We request the adoption of this report and repassage of the bill." It's signed by 4 conferees from the House and 4 conferees from the Senate. I have ruled that this bill is properly before the House, and we are taking action on it now. I find your point of order not well taken. Further discussion on adoption of the Conference Committee report. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The motion prevails.
Tim, you're going to count that side.
A division has been requested. All those in favor of adoption of the Conference Committee report, please stand. Get everybody out of the back room. Give them a minute. Count me as well. There are 69 ayes. The motion does prevail. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
House File number 888, third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading as amended by conference. Any further discussion on the bill? The member from Couchiching, Representative Eklund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I voted for this bill coming off the floor, but I'd like to discuss today, Speaker and members, a few of the concerns I have with the bill. Under the House bill, we'll talk about tourism first. Under the House bill, none of the governor's recommended increases were included, such as additional funding to invest in increased marketing, promotion to expand awareness in Minnesota, and funding to invest in the state's tourism marketing website or for the tourism marketing to secure major events. $300,000 was added to the bill to secure major events for the state of Minnesota. Mr. Speaker and members, tourism is one of the three-legged stools in my district, so it's very important that Explore Minnesota gets funded the way it should be. Second part that I have a problem with the bill is under enforcement. And so the proposed funding is directed at increasing enforcement officers and neglects to cover known inflationary costs, resulting in a zero net increase in enforcement officers. If changes to the employer's pension are adopted, additional reductions of up to 10 positions would be needed to accommodate the additional costs. Mr. Speaker and members, there's estimated a 20-member shortage of conservation officers right now. This provision is also tied up in other omnibus bills before the body. Forestry, Mr. Speaker and members. Lack of an operating adjustment will impact 18 positions within the forestry program, resulting in reduced forest inventory, forest stand improvement, and forest road management. With fewer field foresters to put up timber, lacking the resources to reforest harvest stands, reductions would be seen in the timber harvest at a time that the industry is looking to grow in Minnesota. And we're looking at a plant, Louisiana Pacific, to expand in right on the border of my district and Representative Metz's district, which would be a huge boom to our area. It's we're always talking about getting reinvesting in the range and trying to do something different. This is something new that we could do. We've been advocating for an increased allowable cut, but this may be hard to do or impossible to achieve with these provisions, which are also tied up in other bills. So Mr. Speaker and members, I just wanted to add some of my concerns to this bill and have people take a look at it. Thank you.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
I'd like to defer to Representative Becker-Finn, if I may, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This might technically be the Environment and Natural Resources bill, but it sure isn't a hunting and fishing bill. This bill fails to fund the things that protect our hunting and fishing traditions. Somehow, in the majority view, the Department of Natural Resources is the bad guy. The lack of funding for the DNR will result in lost jobs and lost opportunities to protect wildlife and habitat now and in our future. If this bill were to be signed into law, there would be reductions in fish and wildlife management statewide. 200 fewer lakes would be stocked with fish. Fewer lake surveys would be completed, making it harder to identify and track the spread of invasive species. Fewer deer surveys would be done, and it would be harder to manage the spread of chronic wasting disease. Enforcement would be underfunded, making it less likely that poachers would be caught and more likely that invasive species will hitchhike on our boats and trailers. This bill also fails to address the rapidly diminishing balances of our game and fish and other natural resources and outdoor funds. The DNR and dozens of outdoors groups, the Deer Hunters, the Trout Fishermen, Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Minnesota Outdoor Heritage Alliance, you name it, have asked that hunting and fishing license fees be increased by just a few dollars in order to keep these funds above water. We're talking about just $3 or $4 per person per year. And for whatever reason, you're ignoring these groups and refusing to address these problems with the game and fish and other outdoor funds, even though it wouldn't even hurt your bottom line and your budget target. This bill is short-sighted. You can see the problems coming, the fund balance is going negative, chronic wasting disease, spreading from deer farms and infecting the deer that we hunt, aquatic invasive species spreading to the lakes we love, and you do nothing. Well, I guess you took care of our fashion problems. Now we can wear blaze pink. It will be a little worse at keeping us safe from being shot from those who are colorblind, but at least you'll be able to look cute if you like pink. We've got to be more forward thinking for our kids and grandkids and the future of Minnesota remaining Minnesotan. All these things I've mentioned will result in real consequences for your average hunter and angler. Poorer habitat, whether you're talking about forests, prairies, wetlands, lakes, rivers, fewer fish to catch, sicker deer in the woods. Those aren't my priorities. Those don't match my values. You can do better than this. Members, I encourage a no vote on this bill. It's not good for hunters and anglers, and it's not good for Minnesota. Thanks.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Eklund, Representative Becker-Finn have talked about some substantive major concerns with the bill. I just need members to make sure that we are keeping in mind as we're voting on this bill the fact that when the conference committee last met, when members of the public walked out of that room, as far as they knew, the bill was going to come back before that conference committee. There was going to be a discussion. There was going to be a vote. That's how things work in our democracy. Representative Fabian told staff he wanted to lay the bill over and park it here in the conference committee, and there was a motion to lay it on the table and not put the bill in a conference committee report form. Now that's all a bunch of procedural stuff, but the main point is members of the public are looking at this body, this conference committee that's meeting, that is debating, and they want to know they have some possibility for input. When that's the last time that that meeting happened and there's discussion, this thing is coming back up again, and when it comes back up is late last night, not in any kind of public forum, however the signatures got on the bill. So we need to remember, whatever the substance is, whatever the point is in the end about what the content of the bill is, the fact is members of the public did not get that chance to have that committee get back together again. There was not even a vote. So however it is that the signing happened, there's a big concern with how it is this bill's in front of us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion on repassage. The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I didn't come here today to be prepared to talk about process. I didn't want to be here talking about partisan maneuvering in the middle of the night by the political establishment, the people in power and the establishment making sure that they're going to ram through whatever they do on the first bill. They're sending a message to all of us, everyone here and outside of this room. We are going to do what we want. We are going to do what we want. Often, when we talk process, it looks like just so much gobbledygook to people. The people eat food, people drink water, people live in Minnesota, and people care about their government. And the process we just went through, I don't think the people like. Now, hopefully they're watching. I think they understand when bills get done in the dark of night that there's something you want to hide. And it's all the stuff in here. 144 pages of it. 144 pages in a budget bill. 144 pages of stuff. So there's landfill stuff in here that has far-reaching consequences on water. Doesn't solve the problem with the freeway landfill. Just lets people off the hook. Doesn't solve the problem, doesn't clean up the landfill. We've got issues with a variety of processes in the bill that make it hard to clean up water. Make it harder to clean up water, make it easier for the lawyers. It doesn't include a lot of things. Doesn't include enough money. And what it does, it fits in with a bunch of other bills, a giant Republican Rubik's Cube of interlocking pieces, shifting money around, so you can't really tell responsibility. Who did what? So 2 years ago, there was a swap of clean water money for administrative costs, pens, paper, pencils, gas money for the soil and water districts. And it was sold as being for buffers, but it's administrative costs. Oh, it'll just happen one time. We'll only do it once, we promise. And then it comes back again. So interlocking clean water money, outdoor heritage money, general fund money, game and fish money, all these pieces affect each other throughout this bill and many other bills. So it's hard to find out what really is happening. It's harder to find out what's happening when it happens in the middle of the night. And it's harder to have responsibility when the conference committee doesn't even vote on sending it out. I'd urge members to vote against this bill, and I'm hopeful that we'll see this come again in some form without the multitude of bad policy provisions and with a budget that works for the future of Minnesota.
The member from Blue Earth, Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Hansen, you have a way of getting me out of my seat. When I was a kid, I used to lay down by the microphone or by the phonograph, and I put on these old 78 RPMs, and the ones that were chipped remind me of you. They would hit that chip, middle of the night, middle of the night, middle of the night, middle of the night. You know, you should make an argument. You can make an argument about money. You can make an argument about policy. That would be the proper thing to do. But there isn't one thing you've described here that you Democrats haven't done in the 15 years when you were chairman and you were in charge. Nothing. It's totally hypocritical what you're saying. And then Representative Hortman gets up and says, I don't want to belabor the point. Yes, you do. And then you said that it doesn't go any good to go back and forth when you started it with the accusations, and actually it's going to go back and forth. So it's just a lot of hypocritical things are going on here. And whether in this middle of the night, I have you know, my committee got kudos for transparency. We had 3 days of testimony, and I think the sun was even shining. And NPR gave us a kudos for transparency, so don't lump us all into the middle of the night. And you folks have had many meetings in the middle of the night. I remember one time when Irv Anderson from International Falls, by the way, Representative Eklund, if David Dill would have heard, and some of your Rukavina would have heard you asking for more conservation officers from a guy up in the range, you would have had a conniption. I would have got a kick out of that. I can remember when Irv Anderson busted into meetings when you folks were chairman and told you to quit them because you were at midnight, and he said, end these meetings. So don't bring this middle of the night up stuff that you have done many times before yourselves. So thank you very much.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Nostalgia is a wonderful thing. Memory is often very powerful. Sometimes, Representative Cornish, it slips a little bit. I'll admit it might slip a little more all the time. But I think what's important for Minnesotans, we can talk about the past, we can talk about last night, and we can talk about the future. This bill and many of the other bills are 20th century bills. They're bills in the past. They're bills that don't lay a foundation for the future. When Representative Fabian was going through the items, moving a little bit here, moving a little bit there, trying to make it appear that we're making progress. Whether it's aquatic invasive species, whether it's resource management, we have more and more Minnesotans who love our outdoors, more and more Minnesotans who use our water. So, can we do things for the future? Can we move past the past? And I'll even move past the recent past of last night. In the next few days, can we build a budget that moves the state forward? Can we build a natural resources budget that provides opportunities for people to participate in the outdoors and protects our water and protects our resources? That's what we could do. That's what I think we want to do. I think that's what Minnesotans want us to do. And it's what we should do, working together for a better Minnesota.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 79 ayes and 55 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to.